Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today on the Monday ACSOM Bulletin, I am delighted to be joined by Kevin Graham and Tony Haggerty for what will be a tribute to the late great Bertie Auld. Tony and I were on an impromptu show yesterday, and we both found out the news a short time after the Bulletin, so we didn't have an opportunity to pass on our respects to Bertie's friends, family, and everyone who was ever lucky enough to come into contact with him. So hopefully today we can pay tribute to the great man Bertie Auld. I think all you need to do, social media can be a horrible place at times, but when something like this happens and people start sharing memories and videos, it's a great place to be. I mean, you can sit and get lost in old videos and quotes and wee stories and the amount of pictures that people have had with Bertie Auld. I'm going to come to yourself, Tony, because you have spent a couple of decades at the sharp end of Scottish journalism, and you have come into contact with a lot of these absolute heroes and legends of Scottish football, and in particular, Celtic. What's your memories of Bertie?
Force of nature. Bertie Auld. Did all my crying last night, so I'll try not and greet in the broadcast, but I can't guarantee it. Guy's a legend. I mean, a bona fide Scottish football legend, but just a cracking person as well. Billy Connolly said he could have been a comedian. The big one wasn't right, wasn't wrong about the wee one. Let's put it that way. They said Bob Monkhouse was the million joke man. Bertie Auld was a million song and story man. He had a million anecdotes, a million songs, but most of the time he spent singing the Celtic song. Everybody loved him, right? And I've got a theory, right? Pope John Paul II played in front of 250,000 people, allegedly, at Bellahouston. Bertie Auld had more fans than that, because everybody loved Bertie Auld, right? You couldn't walk down the street without someone talking to him. I know. I think I've spoke this story before, but I'll say it again now. Bertie Auld was dropped for the 57 League Cup final, right, in favour of Nearly Mockin. He played every round in the lead up to it. Never actually got to see the game. And it was a sports reporter that broke the news to him. He said to him, Bertie, your thoughts on the League Cup final? He says, what was the score? He said, Celtic beat Rangers 7-1. And he turned to the guy and said, it's a tragedy, son. A marvellous tragedy. Right? That's the kind of guy he was. Caustic, rapier wit, brilliant, right? So when the news came through yesterday, I was sitting in my mum and dad's house, and I said the line to my dad. I said, that's a tragedy, Dad, but there's no marvellousness attached to this one, sadly. And he was like, you're right, son. And he had the pleasure of not only seeing Bertie Auld play for the Lions, and he actually had the pleasure of meeting him. And I wrote about it in the book when I took them to the Brazen Head. There was a Q&A, and that's how I got to know Bertie Auld. I appeared in lots of Q&As, 3 European Cup winners' medals, and a Scottish schoolboys select Scottish Cup runners-up medal between us. The four of us would sit in a panel, usually with Bertie, Bobby, Jenkins, myself. Talking heads moment. What the hell am I doing here? You may find yourself, that kind of thing. I'm sitting at the table thinking, what am I doing here? And I always sat beside Bertie because you were guaranteed a laugh. So we met that night in the Brazen Head. Bobby did his thing. My dad took him to the bar for a pint, and then he sat down, and Bertie's looking at my dad and said, that's my dad, Bertie, Dan Ennis. And my dad says, Bertie, I used to deliver in Maryhill to the chip shops round about Maryhill. I was a van salesman. And Bertie's like that. He said, I used to see you when you were manager Thistle going in and out the club, And Bertie says, I know your face. You owe me money. He's just a force of nature. He was just a brilliant guy, brilliant company to be around. You were guaranteed a laugh, a joke, and a song with Bertie Auld, right? He was just a wonderful, wonderful human being, And I can't speak highly enough of him because he Tony, my son. That's what he used to call me, Tony, my son, right? And I'll give you a wee poignant story. I was designated to phone him when Billy McNeill died. And it's the calls that you hate to do, isn't it? So I phoned him at 9 o'clock in the morning because I think the news about Billy McNeill broke very early as well. And he's on the phone to Sky, so I think he's on his mobile phone to Sky, and his wife picks up his home phone, and she says, Bertie, it's Tony Haggerty. So I hear him going, it's Tony, my son, I'll phone you guys back later. So he hangs the phone up, and he comes to me, he's like, "Tony, my son." I says, "Bert," and I say, "Oh, Bertie." And nothing's said for the next 10 minutes because we're both just greeting and wailing and howling. And I was like, I said, "Bertie, I'll phone you back later if you can't do this." And he says, No. He says, "Tony," he says, "I've lost my leader. I've lost my inspiration. I've lost my captain." He said, "The Celtic supporters have lost Mr. Celtic." He said to me, "You do the rest." And then that day, he was put up alongside John Clark to speak at Celtic Park about Billy McNeill. So I've gone along, and we're going up the stairs, and he's coming in, and he says, "Tony, my son." I was like, "How you doing, Bertie?" He's here. And I walk over, and he went, "I know I'm getting in there to speak to them." He says, "I will not say what I said to you this morning about we've lost Mr. Celtic." He said, "That was a private moment between me and you." And I'm just standing looking at him. And he's looking at me, and I just grab him and hug him. And I say, "Thanks." And he went, "Right, let's do this." And he walks in, and he's just a raconteur, entertainer. And he gives the guys manna from heaven again. But he didn't. He was true to his word. He never said the line, "We've lost Mr. Celtic." And quite ironically, when Billy McNeill died and we lost Mr. Celtic, that was bestowed upon Bertie, but unwittingly and unknowingly, because he was, as Ian Barry said yesterday, the epitome of everything that embodied what a Celtic player and a Celtic legend should be. He was Mr. Celtic, and it's something that he just did naturally. I've often said that Bertie, in all his dealings with everyday people, he bestowed them a gift, and he bestowed them the gift of Celtic, whether they wanted to hear about it or not. And usually they heard about it in song, chapter, verse, and you couldn't not be swayed by Bertie Auld. There's footage of Ronnie O'Sullivan meeting him on YouTube.
Yep.
Google that footage. Ronnie O'Sullivan eating out the palm. He's got Ronnie O'Sullivan eating out the palm of his hand. That was the gift of Bertie Auld. And everybody who was fortunate to be in the Bertie Auld's company has an anecdote, has a story. And yeah, there's tears, but the one thing you did, there was laughter and there was songs with Bertie, and that's the Bertie I remember. It's the Bertie I think everybody remembers.
Oh yeah, I mean, we will go through the keystone parts of the milestones of his career. It reads like a fairy tale, but also you've got the personal things, Tony, that I think it's important that everybody shares in days and moments like this.
Yeah.
And before I come to yourself, Kev, because we're of a similar era, I know you're a wee bit older, people might be surprised by that, and you went to the games a few years before I did. But I always remember growing up, and I've said this before, that at primary school, it was a rites of passage that if you said you were a Celtic fan, then you had to know the Lisbon Lions starting 11. And if you couldn't recite Simpson, Craig, Gemmell, Murdoch, McNeill, Clark, Johnson, Wallace, Chalmers, Auld and Lennox as if you were reciting the alphabet, then you weren't really a Celtic fan. So you say the names, but it takes you years to start learning about the individual elements of that team and all the different myths and all the different fairy tale moments of that side. But that name all's already in your mind because you've got to prove you're a Celtic fan, so you've got to learn the team. But I also remember it being used in rhyming slang with my old man. If it was a particularly cold morning, "It's Bertie Auld out there, son." That's what he used to say to me. So you know the name Bertie Auld, but you don't know who he is yet. So growing up as a Celtic fan, he's omnipresent. You know of this man, but and then you start watching the grainy footage. Then you have the absolute pleasure and privilege of meeting people who knew him and played with him, and then eventually you meet the great man. So my own personal memories of Bertie is that he was a great personal friend, like you mentioned before, Neely Mockin. He was a great friend of Neely Mockin and Neely Mockin's family. And it was young Neely that actually informed me of the sad passing of Bertie yesterday. And he shared that incredible video that young Neely, had taken in the tunnel on the 50th pilgrimage back to Lisbon. And he had never shared the full thing before, and he sent it. He says, "Please feel free to share this." And Bertie loved old Neely Senior, who obviously was a senior player within the Celtic camp at that time. So I got the opportunity for the first time to speak to Bertie when I was putting together the biography on behalf of the family, Neely Mockin. And then he agreed to speak to me again when I was doing the foreword for the Bobby Evans biography. And Bertie gave me the foreword, which was then included in Tom Campbell's book. And then, going back to something else you mentioned, Tony, I went to the funeral of Mary Mockin, the widow of Neely. And it's at these moments that you realise that Bertie Auld and others, because on that day it was Bertie, John Clark and Jim Craig, were ambassadors for Celtic Football Club, and they were going to funerals of, wives and family members of their ex-teammates, and they were ambassadors, and it wasn't about being in front of the camera, Tony. It was about doing the right thing for their teammates and the wider Celtic family and community. So that's my memories, and I'm going to run through a few others because there was another one here that I think Kevin was present at when I picked up the equipment to do the very first Celtic State of Mind podcast. I picked it up in Greenock. I don't know if you were there, Kev, and it was the 2017 event, and it was a Lisbon Lions event. And on that night, Bertie was there. But he had been pulled from pillar to post to do all the different events for the 50th anniversary. And I think he was at that point where he was maybe needing a wee bit of a break. And he gave a wee speech before he left the event. I went in to pick up the equipment, and I remember him saying the last words he said was, "Say a wee prayer for Billy and Stevie." And that was his parting words. And I just think that, there was a moment where he was looking round and all his teammates were passing on. And there was a realisation in Bertie himself that time was coming. And it doesn't make it any the easier, but I'll always remember those words, "Say a wee prayer." And, yesterday, like yourself, Tony, I said a wee prayer for Bertie and everybody that knew him. So, Kev, what was your memories of Bertie Auld?
It feels like we've lost a member of a time gone by, a gentleman that no longer exists. When growing up in the 80s, your wee village always had this old fella that was everybody's granda. And Bertie Auld felt like he was everybody's granda. And he always had a smile, a story and a song for everybody. Never a bad word to say about. He would give you all the time in the world, and he would pass on all the wisdom in the world to you if you spoke to him. And I feel like Celtic have lost the most natural ambassador that they ever had. And it wasn't a role that was bestowed on Bertie Auld. It was a role that Bertie Auld bestowed on himself to be a natural ambassador of Celtic. And he didn't need anybody to actually tell him what to do. He was just that guy he was great. He would light up any room when he walked into it. I was with my dad yesterday, and he remembered the time when we went to hospitality. And we were in a little room, and Bertie walked in, and we were sitting talking to Mark McGee, funnily enough. And Bertie walked in and just completely took over. It didn't matter who was there, and he had a line for everybody. He had a line for Bobby Lennox, he had a line for Mark McGee. And he was in there for I think it was only about 45 seconds, caused complete chaos and walked out laughing. And you're going, that is immense. That is absolutely brilliant. You always had that blazer on, eh? You always had the Lisbon Lions blazer on as well. He always looked immaculate in that Lisbon Lions blazer. Over the last couple of years, I've took, obviously, I can't remember him as a player or being involved in football as a manager and such like that. I'm just a wee bit too young for that. But the way that he stood up for his teammates as the ravages of time took the toll on the Lisbon Lions. He became more of their spirit and their heartbeat as time went on to try and keep them alive in him. As you says, Paul, he was 2017. I think his gig list that year must have reached hundreds. How many places that he went? But what he says there about Stevie and Billy, he knew he was representing them as well. He knew he was representing his team, and I think that shows a sign of a great, great man, that he knew, I have to represent my teammates and friends for life. And over the last, the Lisbon Lions, I don't want to say rebooted, but since 2015, the 50th anniversary, they've been brung to a new generation. And that new generation, they were brought to that new generation by Bertie, because he was the life and soul of that team, especially going forward, especially as I say, his health started getting in the way of the leader of Mr. Celtic himself, of Stevie, of his other teammates. And it feels like today that we've lost a massive, massive part of Celtic Football Club. And I'm really quite pleased. I only met him a couple of times, and unfortunately it wasn't one-to-one conversations or anything like that with him. But when you see the tributes that are getting paid, I feel for the family today, because they see all these stories about their dad and their granddad and their husband, and how he touched so many people's life. And I feel I'm hoping they're taking some solace in that today, the stories that are getting told about their family members. And they'll be laughing as well, because Bertie would have wanted us all to laugh. He would have wanted us all to laugh. He would have wanted us to celebrate his life. It's a sore one. That is a real sore one. But hey, it's just, we're getting to this point, where we all, I remember the 25th and the 30th anniversary of Lisbon, and they were virtually all still alive, and you always thought they were always going to be immortal, they're always going to be there. 2017, you saw Bertie, and you never thought this day would come when you saw him, the energy that he actually had to wear that Lisbon Lions badge. And it's came, and we need to mark his passing, but it will be marked with laughter and great memories of the man.
Definitely will, Kev. I'm going to pick up on one thing you said there, that it feels as though we have lost a part of Celtic. And I've been banging on, Tony, over the last few weeks about the Celtic bloodline. So if you look at Bertie Auld, he was signed by Jimmy McGrory first time round in 1955. Jimmy McGrory was signed by Willie Maley in 1921. Willie Maley played in Celtic's first ever game on the 28th of May 1888. Bertie's link is to the very origins of this football club. Do you think that's why Kevin's getting this sense we're losing a wee bit of the club when men like Bertie Auld leave us?
Bertie Auld made it all real, didn't he? He straddled every generation of Celtic supporter, didn't he? He was just that guy. Everything flowed kind of through Bertie, past, present and future, funnily enough, And that's why it's such a massive loss, But Bertie played in the team, the Celtic team, the team like no other, because no other Scottish football team will win the Cup with the big ears ever. You can say that for a fact, can't you? And he was immensely proud to be part of that. Wore that blazer, that was his badge of honour. That Lisbon Lions Blazers kept over. It was their invincibility cloak, wasn't it? Because that's what they were. They were an invincible team. They bestrode Europe and claimed scalp after scalp. Did something that no other Scottish or British team had achieved then. And it was beamed to millions around the world because the BBC World Service showed it. Right, all over the world. A Scottish team. And Bertie, I said this morning, Bertie was just gallus, wasn't he? You now have to go to the word gallus in any dictionary, Scottish or English, Oxford English Dictionary, and when you see the word gallus, they should now put an addendum, have the meaning, and then also have the meaning, see Bertie Auld.
A wee picture of Bertie after we beat Leeds where he's got that hat on.
The hat on,
that'll do.
He was just gallus. And I've got lots of stories about him, but I'm in Magaluf with my pal, right? Man U, Man City derby. I'm sitting with 7 fans of both clubs, and I'm kind of watching the screen, but it's kind of outside, the main strip's outside. So my leg's dangling outside. There's a huge hill, and down the hill is coming a guy, denim shorts, bare chest, hairy chest. It's like, and as he's getting closer and closer, I'm like, that's Bertie Auld. Flip-flops, strolling, Magaluf. So I jump out in the middle of the hill and I'm like, Bertie! And he's like, Johnny, my son. So he runs down. He's getting flip-flops and he's running down. And so we do a wee jump around, we kind of huddle. I says, I'm in there. I'm watching Man U, Man City. I says, we're a crowd of boys. I says, come on in. She's like, great. She said, I've jumped her, I've popped out for a loaf. Right, okay, the usual story. So, and he comes, and so the guys, we're talking about them, and the guys turn around and he says, what's the old geezer having? So that annoyed me, right? So I've been like that. I says, I tell you what you do, mate. She says, you go to the bar, get a notebook and a pen. I says, and you take the order. I said, but you'll do something else when you come back. So he goes to the bar, right enough, and he gets the notebook and the pen. And I say, gentlemen, I said, I'd like to introduce you to a special friend of mine. I says, this is Bertie Auld, 1967 European Cup winning legend for Celtic against Inter Milan. I says, and it's no joke. I says, this is who he is. I said, right, Bertie, tell them about cuffing Man U in 1968, 4-1, and playing alongside Bobby Charlton, Law and Best. I go to the toilet and I come back. All the boys are in knots, laughing. The guy with a pen and a notepad's like, going to sign this for such and such, going to sign this for such and such. And the palm of his hand, and I'm talking about like, literally 90 seconds, I've gone to the toilet and came back out. And all these guys are just like, this guy's a legend. And I'm like, yeah, I know he's a legend. I told you he's a legend. I says, he ain't no old geezer. So he stays for a wee while. And then he says to me, I better go up the road. He says, I can't do that to the missus, right? I says, no bother, fine. And so he hadn't bought a drink because I wouldn't let him, and I wouldn't let him dip into his pocket. So he walks up the hill, and then the barman comes and says, here, you get like a round of drinks for everybody. And I'm like, I said, we never ordered that. He says, your man bought you it. So I jump in, I saw kind of going, Bertie! And he just flicks a finger like that and waves and just walks up the hill. You know, and I was raging because he spent money, but it's just, you know, he just enjoyed his wee day, you know, his wee couple of hours he spent away for the wife. And I was just like, wow. And it was a game that Michael Owen scored in the last minute, remember? He missed all that. It's like, I don't think he was scared.
I wonder if they got that loaf.
I don't think so. I'm thinking to myself, of all the excuses, I'm going out for a loaf. Just say you're going out for a pint, you know what I mean? It's like, he was just a magical man, you know.
He probably didn't need a loaf. He was probably all inclusive. He probably just said to the missus, I'm going out for a loaf.
Listen, you see the big thing I associate as a kid, Bertie Auld, with that team that you would recite and the rhyming slang for it being particularly cold of a morning. But then you then associate him with that great side from the 60s, and it's only when you start digging in you realise that he was a very important member of the Celtic team 10 years before he played in Lisbon, making his debut in 1957 against Rangers. And what I always find interesting when you look at these lineups are the type of players that he lined up alongside. So you've got Sean Fallon, Bobby Evans, Neely Mockin, Charlie Tully, Willie Fernie, Bobby Collins. He was part of that side. And like Tony says quite rightly, he did play in every round in the 1957 League Cup run right up to the final. And, you know, we will talk about it, but the mind boggles if he would have been part of that side and part of the Lisbon side. That's just incredible. But he fell foul first time round of Robert Kelly, who was something of a disciplinarian, and Bertie was kind of classed as being something of a rapscallion. He had a bit of a rogue nature about him. Kevin, isn't that what we loved about Bertie, though? His rogue nature.
It was, he was a character, and it's when football could get away with big characters like Bertie. And, I mean, obviously, as Tory called him a raconteur, I can't remember who says it, but somebody on social media today says he was like Eric Morecambe, but he could play football. That's what he was. He was an entertainer. He was an entertainer on the pitch and an entertainer off the pitch. And
entertainer. Say it right.
I mean, and that's, if you look at that, the Lisbon Lions, and we've been lucky enough to be in the same room as them so many times, they were all characters. They were, and if you were to be the main man in that dressing room, you had to be top dollar. And Bertie was top of the top. He was the entertainer in that dressing room. And I mean, even when like we beat Jimmy and all of that there, the crack must have been absolutely unbelievable. And he's just, as you say, 10 years before. It's no surprise he fell out with Mr. Kelly, because if he was that gallus 10 years before, then 10 years later he's in the tunnel in Lisbon. Telling me Jimmy Johnson, that doesn't matter. how they look, can they play football? I mean, no wonder that he sort of fell out with Mr. Kelly at that point, eh?
I think that you're right, and to turn that nature, that rogue nature, into a positive is exactly what he did do, because, you know, the word gallus, you need to have that gallus. I mean, standing there in that tunnel, we'll get to the tunnel moment, it's become fairy tale in Celtic folklore, and to have that self-belief, I mean, already he's got you a goal ahead. He's going to fill the players in that tunnel with belief. But on the point of him being a guy who was an inspiration, I remember speaking to George Conley about this, and he said that there were 3 captains in that Celtic side. So when you were on the park, you had Bobby Murdoch, Bertie Auld and Billy McNeill, and you couldn't fail. Do you think that was the case, Tony? When you look back, they 3 inspirational figures, 3 big leaders in that Celtic side.
Celtic won the European Cup in the tunnel. They won it in the tunnel. Because that was Bertie's way of saying, you're in a dogfight here, and we're not lying down. So you can look the part. Can you play the part? I don't think you can. And you know, and they're singing, they're belting the song out, and they're looking at them as if, who are these guys? You know, they won it there and then, because they would have frightened the absolute living daylights at them. And you walk onto the park and you're like, and I think you see when they're lining up, Jimmy Johnson's pointing to a guy, isn't he? You marking me? As if I heard that. You know what I mean? That kind of Glasgow guy heard that. You can mark. You know what I mean? You can mark anything. You know, you and me, right? Cool. Let's go. And these guys had never encountered anything like that before. And from a team that they were supposedly cannon fodder. And Celtic pulverised Inter Milan. If you got the stats up today, it's a 2-1 doing. An absolute hammering. You know, and led by Bobby, Bertie, Billy and Jinky. I mean, they turned on a masterclass, and it led to Steen saying that great quote in it. It wasn't because we won it. We won it by playing pure, beautiful, inventive football. And a lot of the world, again, hadn't seen football like this, because the BBC showed it, so it was beamed live to millions, and it was like, who is this team? And Milan were I've said it before, it's, you know, this was guys that spun round close poles and tournaments and, kicked, not even a leather football around, just kicked something, a spherical object.
Street footballers, Tony.
Football, right.
Mm-hmm.
Down in European sophisticates, the catwalk kings, and these unfashionable, you would call them street urchins, give them a football lesson, an absolute lesson. It's one of the greatest, Kevin loves a romantic, it's one of the football's greatest romantic stories ever. Who are these guys? No, they're singing in the tunnel. They're not meant to win this. It's
cinematic. It's the kind of thing that you could write in a script and people would say, you know what, that's maybe a wee bit far-fetched.
You know, and it is Roy the Rover stuff. It is, right? But it happened. And Bertie and the guys, they were a band of brothers. They were it's like their greatest, their greatest hour and a half. They'll talk about it to you all day if you want, but they'll never bring it up. You have to bring it up. The most humble men ever. And the enormity of that achievement was only really felt, as Kevin was saying, 30, 40, 50 years later. Because it was taken as read that Celtic were a good team back then. But this was the best Celtic team ever, of which Auld and Murdoch and McNeill and Johnston just but it was natural to them to be the best. Because Steen said, you're the best. Go and show the world, go and show Europe you're the best. So it was they were doing things that were natural to them, yet to the outside world and people watching it was astonishing. And it was astonishing that you could get a group of people from such a small radius to become the best team and, a leg away from, or a 90-minute game away from being the best team, officially crowned the best team in the world. But that was not to be. But there's something poignant about that and beautiful about that. And Auld and Steen and McNeill and Murdoch, they epitomised that, Jinky and all that, and embodied that. And we mean, what, 2021? We're talking about a team we never even seen.
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? They're still revered, they're lauded, they're loved. And a man in such an important fulcrum of that team died yesterday. And that's why there's this outpour of emotion, laughter, grief, pain, sadness, tears, joy. Call it what you like. Because that's the way Bertie would have wanted you to remember him. Without a shadow of a doubt. Remember everything. You know,
the thing is, Tony, the great thing about being able to come on and speak about it is the fact that you give Celtic fans a platform to do the same. And it is always difficult to get as many comments in as possible because we're streaming out to a great many Celtic supporters today. But just to give you an idea, I could probably go through every single comment and bring every single one of them up. But I'm going to bring a few up as we go through this discussion. And first and foremost, Boulder Highland Paddy, rest in peace, Bertie boy. Stephen McGonigal, rest in peace, my great friend Bertie. And it goes on. Rest in peace, Bertie, a fantastic human being. Let's celebrate his life, not mourn it. A true Celtic great gone, but always in our hearts for eternity. You'll never walk alone. Sleep well, my good man. That goes on and on and on. I could read dozens and dozens of these messages. I think it was Mac O'Vanny, Kevin, who said that it was won by a Glasgow and District Select side in 1967. I seen John Hartson on the telly this morning. John was getting very emotional. He spoke beautifully about Bertie Auld, who had become a friend of John's in latter life as well. And it just brings home that legendary status that every one of the lines undoubtedly has, Kevin. And it's one of these things that you hear all these wee stories, and I sometimes feel guilty telling stories that aren't mine, but I'm sure the people won't mind so much. And I remember I was talking to John Sludden, who, again, very, very sadly passed away recently as well. And John was the nephew of Neely Mockin and a very, very good friend of Brian McLaughlin, the first super who came through after the Lions, and his career was cut short. His top flight career anyway was cut short by a particular Clyde player who the family asked us not to name because he was only famous for one thing. But then we got a wee story through one of the kind of lesser known players who was playing for the reservists day when Bertie Auld got that player back, and he done it in such a way that the ref didn't see him, but he got him back for wee Brian McLaughlin. And it was that kind of nature, Kevin, that we grew to love. I spoke recently to Jim Orr, who of course has just successfully put on a play called Bend It Like Bertie, and I says to him that Bertie Auld would not look out of place in a gangster movie. You could just imagine him with that beautifully dressed, the big jacket over the top of him, and later on as a manager, the big cigar as well. He was almost like a movie figure, Kev.
He was, and it's quite interesting seeing the pictures from the time where he was a manager with a big cigar and the sheepskin coat, and you really are thinking Arthur Daly. You really are thinking, is he going to try and sell me a Ford Cortina? And he probably would have sold you a Ford Cortina if there was a Ford Cortina to be sold. If you met him in the car park at Celtic Park, he probably would. He probably went, "Do you want to buy that car, son?" And you'd be driving away in it within 5 minutes. It's an image that you didn't get now. It's a down to earth, salt of the earth image that you do not get with football players now. And the fact that he could relate to guys like John Hartson, who are from a different era, guys like Chris Sutton from a different era, shows that he understood not just footballers, he understood the human beings. He had that human touch about him, and he just so happened to be a cracking football player, played in the greatest ever football side with 10 of his mates, but he still had that image, and he knew how to cultivate it. He was, I mean, we talk about like Jimmy Johnson and stuff like that. I mean, Tommy Gemmell, who I spent many a night with, and as well, he was an entertainer as well. He was a good-looking big fella, and that dressing room was full of good-looking big fellas. And Bertie wasn't probably the most natural good-looking one, but he made up with it with Patter. He made up with it Patter and believing that he was the best-looking fella in that dressing room.
What I love, Tony, talking about the tunnel, because that has entered folklore. Celtic, that story in the Lisbon tunnel will be told forever. Simple as that. Our kids and our grandkids will hear that same story. And that's down to Bertie Auld.
Aye, and the 2 tunnel stories, the one with John Gregg, about the bonus money. I mean, now, there was seen last night, there was a thread about Celtic should name the tunnel at Celtic Park the Bertie Auld Tunnel.
Love that.
I saw that last night and I thought, you know what? I'd love that to happen. Let's refer to it or name it as the Bertie Auld Tunnel, because 2 of the greatest stories of Bertie Auld happened in tunnels. Lisbon and then Ibrox. You know, that just that rapier wit again. Much bonus are you on? £3. We're on 6. My 3's guaranteed. Right? I mean, to actually come away with that as you're walking out there knowing there's guys going to count lumps at you. And again, Gallus, no caring. I've got these guys. I've got my mates. My mates will sort you out if you try it. You know what I mean? And that wasn't the conceit or arrogance of that team. It's the spirit and the belief that they had that they were going out there at Ibrox to beat Rangers. Didn't matter. Right? You know, they might be on double the bonus money. That's how much they fear us, guys. Let's go out and get our bonus money. Just win on the park where it matters. You know, and entertain, as he kept saying. You know, that was his big thing. You know, and also as well, I've got another story. I had a girlfriend a while ago. I've now got a wife, but she's not. She wasn't.
You don't have to explain yourself, Tony.
Her mother died over the festive period, New Year period, and this girlfriend at the time had met Bertie Auld a couple of times because she'd came to a few of the Q&As. So Bertie had heard that her mother was being buried in Our Lady of Lourdes Chapel in East Kilbride. So we'd gone to the funeral, and then at the end of it, or end of the kind of, you know, you go back to wherever we were back to, and somebody said, Bertie Auld was there today. And I was like, oh, was he? Did he come? And they were like, yeah, he sat at the back of the church. And he hadn't told me he was coming. He hadn't said he was coming. So I phoned him and I said, look, I heard you came to the funeral, you know, Michelle's mum's funeral today. I said, why did you not come up and say something? And he said, wasn't it the Bertie Auld show today, son? He said, it wasn't the day for that. He said, I paid my respects, I left. And I thought, you know, just a gem of a fella, you know, and he'd met my girlfriend about 2 or 3 times, you know, and he just came along because he, you know, that's the kind of guy he was. You know, a true man of the people, and he just knew that if he'd have made a big song and dance about it, it might have became about him being there, and he didn't want that. And I just thought, what a class act, you know, what a cracking man. And as I say, every Celtic supporter who was lucky to meet him will have their own story. There's comments coming in, you know, 10 to a dozen. He was just he was a wonderful human being as well, a wonderful footballer, but a wonderful human being. And no many, you know, and you know, as Kevin says, he was, you know, everybody that met, they were just bonded by Celtic. Bertie could sell you anything. He could sell you the Celtic dream. He is the Celtic dream, you know what I mean? He's dreams and songs to sing, you know, that's like Bertie's epitaph, you know, and you just kind of, you feel there's a great disturbance in the force today, the fact that Bertie's left, is he?
Yeah. And, you interestingly, a couple of times talk about how he could sell you stuff. I remember going up to Saltcoats for the unveiling of the Bobby Lennox statue that day, and I bumped into Kevin Miles. Kev, who you know, who's been in a couple of times on ACSOM and done a session way back for us. Kevin wrote that brilliant Celtic song, Celtic My Heart and My Soul. And he was there with his old granddad, who almost went into business with Bertie selling used cars after Bertie's after Bertie's career ended. And Bertie came right over. I remember he came right over to speak to Kevin Mills' granddad. It was great. And as you say, everybody's got the stories. But one thing, your idea about the Bertie Auld Tunnel that you've mentioned there as well, Tony, people are right behind that. And it would just, again, be another part of the experience of visiting Celtic Park, you know. And
you keep the man alive, don't you? That legacy alive.
The legend, because you've then got to explain why it's called the Bertie Auld Tunnel. Absolutely.
And those 2 stories just about it, you know. So
the thing is, the reason that we're sitting talking about this today on this platform today is because Bertie Auld and those other 10 players. They created the modern day Celtic at that point in Lisbon, and that's the reason that we all believe in fairy tales and we all want fairy tales, because they done it.
Yeah,
that's why you're such a romantic, Kev.
It is, and I make no. I'm not going to deny that. That's why I believe Celtic should play a certain way. That's why I believe Celtic should stand for certain things. Is because of those 11 guys.
Yep.
It is. It's the greatest footballing story ever, and they guys were part of it. Those guys were part of the greatest movie ever, the greatest movie that was never made, and it happened to them in real life, and it happened to our fathers and grandfathers in real life as well. They watched that unfold, and that's the reason we've got this platform today. That's the reason that Celtic Football Club are so dear to the hearts of millions all over the world today, and that's because of guys like Bertie Auld.
Yeah. Do you think there should be a statue every Lisbon Lion outside Celtic Park?
Yes, up that Celtic way.
Yeah,
yep.
I think it's right for it, isn't it? See that famous photo where they're all together with Steen?
Mm-hmm.
They should recreate that with all the trophies, and it's just the Lisbon Lions and Steen. They should put that. They should immortalise that in statues. I think, because I think that would be absolutely brilliant.
Imagine they would come from far and wide to get their picture taken with that.
I think that's one of the few photos that exist of them all, isn't it?
There's only, believe it or not, Tony,
you know,
there is only one picture in colour with the big cup, with the big ears, the 11 players and Jock Stein. There is only one colour picture. It was taken by Hugh J. Burke. And only one picture exists just with those figures. Yeah, I know there was team groups after, etc., with loads of other figures. But just with the 11, Jock Stein and the cup, one colour picture exists. That is incredible. One other thing that just came to my mind there that Bertie actually told me when I was doing the Nearly Mocking book was that there was a couple of brilliant stories that he told. But one thing he told us was that Nearly became the old school kit man and you know, the sponge man. You know, like if you got injured, he would come on with a magic sponge, basically. But one of the other kind of backroom guys was Jimmy Steele, who was a boxing trainer, and he'd started to supply Nearly with smelling salts. He says, you know, if the guys get a dunt on the head, get in with the smelling salts. But you know, it was in a little vial, and there was a liquid in there. And the first time I ever used it was against Dundee United, where Bertie Auld collided with a post. And he's a wee bit kind of like dazzled, and Nearly Mocking poured it up his nose. He thought that's how he opens the vial and poured the smelling salts up Bertie Auld's nose. And I don't think it worked, but you know, Nearly says, "Oh, it's a newfangled thing that Jimmy Steele's given us," and he's poured it up Bertie Auld's nose, which was just unbelievable. One thing that occurred to me.
Kevin mentioned Tommy Gemmell, and there's a great story because I was reading all sorts last night, and Bertie Auld and Tommy Gemmell was up singing, something, and then the crowd kept asking for an encore for Tommy Gemmell because Bertie Auld had convinced him that it was the actor Danny Kaye. So he kept asking for Tommy Gemmell.
He does bear a passing resemblance to Danny Kaye, though.
He does.
And the quaff and all that was there. Yeah,
it was Danny Kaye, and keep asking for more songs, and so they wouldn't let him get off the stage. And Tommy Gemmell, can you understand how he's like, he can't get the mic for more time than he should have? And that was part of it. Bertie Auld convincing everybody they were watching Danny Kaye.
It's incredible. Here's one for you, right? I was thinking about this morning. Obviously, leave Celtic having fallen foul to the discipline of Sir Robert Kelly, or just playing Robert Kelly back then. And he goes to Birmingham, plays in a European final, incredibly, plays in a European final. And when he comes back, there is a belief, there might be part of the fairy tale, this belief that even though Jock's team was a Hibs manager, he was asking, he knew he was coming back to Celtic, and he was through Sean Fallon asking for Bertie Auld to come back. I don't know, you'll probably never know who was instrumental in bringing him back, but he was certainly brought back. And it makes me wonder how many, really, in the history of Celtic, how many players have been successful when they come back to Celtic. Here's a guy in Bertie Auld who comes back and plays in 2 European Cup finals for Celtic, Kev. I'm struggling because as much as I love Frank McAvenny, he wasn't as successful coming back. Same with Charlie Nicholas. Wee argument to say maybe Fraser Forster, but he comes back on loan. Nobody has come back with such aplomb and with such success as Bertie Auld.
it's unrivaled. When it's what you forget. You sometimes forget about the 10 years before, as you mentioned, in 1957, he played in all the rounds up to before the final. A lot of Celtic fans won't know that because of the momental event, which is Lisbon. Which is fair enough, and that's fair enough. But the fact is, as you say, he played in a European final with Birmingham, played with two with Celtic, came back, was part of the greatest ever Celtic side. And you're right, you're completely right. That is something. Maybe did he have it in his heart that this was his chance, this was destined, that he was meant to come back, that was always written in the stars that this was going to... He's got that sort of galliness. I don't know if he believed in fortune or stuff like that, but was he standing in that tunnel in Lisbon? I'm going to add a narrative onto this now, but was he standing in that tunnel in Lisbon going, I was meant to be back here. I'm meant to be standing here.
Of course he was. I was born to do this.
I'm meant to. I got this chance. I got the second opportunity because him up there says I was going to be here this day. And it's just... Fate sometimes is the fickle finger of fate, and we've all got sliding doors moments. I've got parallel universes left, right, and centre in my head. And when you think about that, I'm getting sent for the club that he loves to Birmingham, back up the road, and he gets the chance to come back with whoever brought him back. The next thing you can, Steen arrives. 18 months later, you're standing in the tunnel at Lisbon. It's phenomenal. It is a phenomenal story. And that's one thing that shone through everything that Bertie done for that point, that he knew he was a humble, but he also knew he was a lucky man. He also knew that fortune had blessed him with a life that he had led. And
beautifully summed up there, Kev, I've got to say.
The 2 goals in 65 cup final, which is not
monumental.
Sure enough, right? But the header, and he falls into the net and he's just like that, and then the second one when he slams into the net, and then he runs in and he batters it into the net again as if, get in there. It's like, right, I think that made it 2 each, and it was like that kind of sense of, right, we're now going to win this, and he was just, he was just a force of nature. He was, you cannot underestimate what it must have been like as Bertie Auld's teammate. I mean, my father tells me, and everybody that I've spoke to, that Bobby Murdoch was a world-class footballer.
Yeah.
And I mean world-class in the genuine sense of the meaning of those words. Middlesbrough website says he was world-class. Graham Souness says he learnt everything in his career from Bobby Murdoch. That's a high compliment indeed.
Yeah.
So you've got a world-class footballer in Bobby Murdoch in the midfield, and alongside him is a guy who might not have been world class, but he was up there in terms of being a very, very good footballer. You had Jimmy Johnston, you had McNeil and Clark at the back, and I'm told Clark was a fantastic footballer as well, a brilliant leader. So you've got quality all through that team, which Kev says, well, you've got quality pattern and guys that just don't take any rubbish, you know what I mean? And very good. Just not dismissive, dismissive on the park, because their ability will outshine theirs. As he says to Jimmy Johnson, can they play? Turns out Inter Milan could play, just couldn't play as well as Celtic because they get battered. I mean, absolutely battered. And that kind of gallus swagger that they had, guys like Bertie Auld put that into Celtic, and it's a trait and a quality that, when channeled the right way, leads to great success, and you enjoy it.
The Lisbon Lions represent Glasgow in the swinging 60s, coming out post-war years. As Tony, you've already mentioned them playing football in the backyards and that, But they showed that they didn't have the movie star look. Well, some of them did, I reckon. Some of them did look as good as
Bertie would have been in any gangster flick. I'm sticking to that.
He would have.
I mean, is you going to call the film Coming Straight Out of Glasgow or something like that?
But they summed up Glasgow at that point. There was a gallus nature to Glasgow at that time, and those 11 guys summed it up, and Bertie was the heartbeat of that. He was the heartbeat of that, and that's been proved as we went on. And mean, you talk about Lisbon, and Bobby Murdoch. If you go back and we've all watched the game from Lisbon, Bobby Murdoch was absolutely outstanding in that game. Man in the match by an utter week and a half in that game. But as you say, he had his lieutenant alongside him. I'd be Bertie alongside him, and like John Clark was strolling through that game as if it was like he was on a beach in Albufeira, no, actually in Lisbon. And Bertie just summed up that time that we'll never recapture. Time that will never be captured. And for me, that was hammered home in 2017. As times now, as I've already said, time was then going on. You had the documentary that was made, and the big thing at the Hydro and that.
That was an incredible documentary, Kev.
Oh, it was
John McClaverty. It was unbelievable.
Tear-jerking, man.
Yeah.
And that was it. That's a spirit of Glasgow. That's when Celtic became not just an Irish immigrant club, but a Scottish club. And those 11 guys actually made that happen. And guys like Bertie, they talk about transcending the divide. Bertie transcended the world. It doesn't matter a divide. He transcended the world, and he brought Celtic to everybody that he met.
I just bestowed the gift of Celtic. I mean, there's a great clip as well of Bobby Murdoch talking about a Celtic Rangers game. I'm sure it was at Ibrox, and he said that both he and Bertie had scored inside the first 4 minutes, and you could actually see Rangers fans coming in and asking their pals what the score was, and they're saying 2-0 down. They were leaving. It's just like, if Bobby actually says that, he says you could see them. He said, we're coming in. See some guys coming in late. He said, and they've obviously said to their pals, what's the score? 4 minutes gone, 2-0 down. Stuff this game over type thing, you know. So
see that documentary that Kev mentioned there? It was the BBC one, wasn't it, Kev?
It was.
It won a BAFTA, I think. It was directed by John McClaverty, and it was that documentary where Bertie played a massive part. He really contributed massively in that, and he goes back to his childhood home and all this. And you could tell he was becoming very emotional because there was that realisation, like Kev says, by the time 2017 comes along, that you're losing these guys that you've been through so much with. And I remember getting a sense of that with Sean Fallon because, he says he misses his pals. And I know, having read Tony's piece during the week with Billy Stark, he talks about missing his pal, Tommy Burns. And it is such an emotional thing, but I've got to throw in a couple of other wee bits here. I remember speaking to, again, doing the Nearly Mocking documentary this time, speaking to Bobby Lennox, and he spoke about that tunnel. Now, you've got to imagine, right? You've got to imagine the amount of time these guys have told the story, right? They've told the story 1,000,000 times. But he said something that day, and I'd never heard it. He was like, and the famous story, they were all film stars. They all looked like film stars with the tans and beautiful hair and the white teeth. He goes, my teeth were in Ronnie Simpson's bonnet behind the goal. And there is a bonnet bit, in the goal net, which is housing Ronnie's teeth and Bobby Lennox's teeth in the European Cup final. I mean, the story about Nearly Mocking having to paint the Adidas stripes on the Puma bits the night before the game with white paint. And as the game goes on, they starts fading. It's incredible. But that 1965 Scottish Cup final as well cannot be understated because that was the moment. And it's easy as time passes on. We beat Dunfermline. What does that mean? Well, Dunfermline had been built at that stage. That team had been built by Jock Stein, and they'd already made inroads into European football. They'd brought some great nights to East End Park. Celtic probably shouldn't have won that final against the Pars that day. No. When Jock Stein comes back in his first game, he beats Airdrie 6-0, right? It's in March 1965. Bertie Auld scored 5 goals. That's Jock Stein's first game in charge. And then he scores the 2 goals. And what I love in that final against the Pars where he scored 2 goals, the wee ball boy that's kicking the ball out the net's Andy Lynch. So fast forward 12 years and he's taken a penalty into the same goal for Celtic against Rangers, and it goes on and the baton moves on and the story continues. And that's what I opened up the discussion today talking about. Bertie is one of the last links to the formation of this club. Signed by Jimmy McGrory, who was signed by Millie Maley, who played in the first game in 1888. And as us guys get a wee bit older, we'll start losing links like that. And it's so important, whilst they're here, to absolutely celebrate them. There's some great stories. As I say, I sometimes feel guilty sharing them, because they're not my stories to share, but the world would be a lesser place if we didn't share them, right? And a great pal of ours, Jim Simonette, who was absolutely instrumental in setting up a State of Mind studio, tells a great story about Bertie visiting Jimmy Johnston. An absolutely great story. And basically, Jim Simonette was in the house with Jinky, and Agnes goes away for the shopping. And while she's away, Bertie and others have been hiding in the street and in bushes and in hedges and behind cars for her to leave. And they come in with a carry-out so that they can spend a bit of time with wee Jinky, who by this stage is quite ill himself physically. And obviously the mayhem ensues over the next couple of hours. And when Agnes comes into the room, she's having a go at Jim Simonette because he was meant to be looking after Jinky, and Bertie comes up with the immortal line, "The best defences in Europe couldn't stop us, Agnes. What chance did he have?" And wee Jinky's been on the wine and everything. Oh, man, what an absolute incredible story.
He's a legend, isn't he? I mean, that mind, it was sharp as a tack. You know, you can't buy comedy like that. I mean, that's brilliant. The man he could have been a comedian. Billy Connolly was right. In fact, Bertie Auld could have been anything he wanted to be. Footballer, been there, seen it, done it. Comedian, great. Selling cars, could have done it. You know what I mean?
Thing is, he was the second boy from that family who's shown an incredible talent for football. His older brother Ian was doing it in London with Arsenal. Didn't make the grade. But, I mean, the talent ran through the family. And the one thing I've said time and time again, I remember speaking to wee Stevie Murray, and I know there's the name Stevie Murray is associated with Celtic, but this is the author that wrote 10 Men Win the League, Kenny of the Celtic. And he was talking about that 10 Men Winning the League book, and he's talking about when Jock Stein leaves Celtic, who do you name as the manager? Who could possibly become the manager of Celtic Football Club after Jock Stein? Now, again, just before my time, so I wouldn't have been reading the papers at the time, but apparently the names mentioned around about that time were Billy McNeill, who eventually got the job, Paddy Crerand, and Bertie Auld. Now, at that time, Bertie would have been the Partick Thistle manager. And I'm going to take this opportunity almost, as a wee footnote. He did sign Maurice Johnston for Partick Thistle. But Bertie's name was mentioned as a Celtic manager. I can picture him as a Celtic manager. I can picture him in that dugout, Tony. I know.
Can you imagine Bertie Auld as a Celtic manager? That'd have been brilliant. I'd love to have been a journalist at those press conferences. That'd have been gold.
I always loved going to Firhill because the supporters' coaches parked in Panmure Street.
Yeah.
And I always used to when you were walking down and round the corner to Firhill, you always used to look up and see the sign Panmure Street, and you went, Bertie Auld stayed in one of these houses, because the houses haven't changed since that time, eh? And I didn't ken, it always just tickled me that you were parking in a street that a Lisbon lion grew up in. And I just found that, well, maybe that's just me.
No, absolutely, because it was the Panmure boys, wasn't it? The wee gang that used to run about that street as well. And I think Bertie used to run with them and sing the songs as well, didn't he?
Yeah. I was asked to write some for the Celtic Way, Paul John, about Bertie today, and I think it's getting put up this afternoon. But I just thought, and I ended with this. I said, if there's to be any sort of silver lining that we can take from Bertie Auld's passing, it's possibly this. Bertie will now be reunited with the likes of Ronnie Simpson, Tommy Gemmell, Bobby Murdoch, Billy McNeill, Jimmy Johnson, Stevie Chalmers, and of course Jock Stein. That thought alone should fill every Celtic supporter's heart with joy, yet somehow it's enough to make your heart grow sad. Goodbye, Mr. Celtic. That's what I said.
With those words, and as wee Bertie himself said back in 27 when he said, say a wee prayer for Steve and Billy, I think we will all say a wee prayer for Bertie Auld today. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the chat. It's an emotional day. It's a day of looking back fondly on one of Celtic's absolute icons, Bertie Auld. Thank you, Kevin Graham and Tony Haggerty, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.